When we get from pre-matter, liquid light, we go down to what's called etheric matter density. Corresponds to D7, 8, and 9. D7, 8, and 9 are, again, another set of 3 scalar wave grids, light bulb sequences, flashing on and off flashline sequences. Okay? These 3 are flashing a little bit slower. Now notice, there's a slowing of the flash lines as they come down. The primal light fields have constant on light bulbs. They don't even flash. They're just on in your face all the time. Then you have these here. They begin the flashing on and off process. But these are the fastest flash on and off. Right here. It's really fast pulse. As matter solidifies, or the reality fields that matter takes place in solidify, it goes into what's called etheric matter density, which they slow a little bit more. As the pulses slow a little bit more, the matter densifies a little bit more. In D7, 8, and 9, harmonic universe 3, it is an etheric matter field. If you saw an etheric matter being, it would look ghostly to you. It would have form differentiation much more than a liquid light being would, because they tend to all look the same. Okay. But it would still be very ghost-like, but not like a ghost that looks just like your Uncle John that passed on. It wouldn't have that much detail of self, okay? That detail comes in the next level of densification. All right, so remember, we're getting denser here as we go. We came from coming in from source, contracting ourselves and expanding out into the light fields. Then we began actually to contract or slow again. We come from density harmonic 5 to harmonic 4 to harmonic 3. Now we're in etheric matter. Then, next stop down, the next slowest set of flashline sequences is D4, 5, and 6, or if you're incoming, D6, 5, and 4. That forms harmonic universe 2. Harmonic universe 2 is semi-etheric matter. That's the stage of matter density that is someplace between what we would consider ghost-like matter density and what we see as physical matter density here. So that is, if you saw a being that beamed in, there was a semi-etheric matter density. It would appear ghost-like, but more like Uncle John that came to visit. It would have much more feature distinction. It would be much more three-dimensional. You would feel more three-dimensional. We won't get into right here that the only way you'd see a being like that is if you have some of your higher strands activated, because you wouldn't be able to see them even if they came and stood in front of you, if you only had 3 strands activated, if you didn't have some of the higher subharmonics, because their matter would be at a different flash line sequence than your matter. The trick of DNA activation is you're getting something called multi-vector flash lines moving in your body at once. When a body is born into a system, which I won't get into that right now either, but because it's a process, the fetal integration process, you end up with a body that has first 3 sets of flash line sequences for density 1, which is down here, dimensions 1, 2, and 3. Down here, you have a solid density 1 matter body, which is the physical matter density that we know and identify here. As we grow, we're supposed to begin activation of DNA strands that progressively allow our bodies to process the consciousness that goes with these higher stations of identity. Because in truth, we don't leave any of those stages. If we come in from source and begin the process of being put in manifestation, we leave a piece of our consciousness at each state. That means you have an ascended master that's you. That means you have an avatar that's you. The ascended master part of you would be out here in the primal sound fields. The part of you that we call a rishi, which is a bit higher than avatar, okay? If you're going to do the hierarchy, they're all equally blessed. But the rishi level of yourself would be stationed here in the primal light fields. The avatar level of yourself would be stationed here. Dark avatars go only up to here, 11.5, but Christos avatars, which is what humans were created to be, have that part of their avatar consciousness here, which is directly connected to the other levels of consciousness. Down here, in harmonic universe 3, you have your oversoul consciousness. In harmonic universe 2, dimensions 4, 5, 6, you have your soul consciousness. And here, you have your personality incarnate consciousness, the part of you that you know as you. But it's actually composed of 3 parts. It has your mental body. That's the egotistical part. That's not bad. Ego is not a bad word, by the way. You have negative ego, but general ego, what ego means, it's the part of you that looks out on dimension 3. It's the part of your consciousness simply looking out on dimension 3. It only becomes negative if it gets twisted up and starts to use ideas that are working against the divine blueprint. Okay? So you have, what you're composed of here is a dimension 3 mental body, a dimension 2 emotional body, which is the emotional elemental body. It's literally held in the elements that your body is made out of. Your water molecules, your protein molecules, all that stuff. Those molecules, what are they made out of? Who are they made out of? They're made out of you. The subatomic particles that you're made out of, your body is made out of, are one of the forms that your consciousness is taking right now to give you this experience. So when you look at your toe, for instance, you're seeing something composed of cells that are composed of molecules, that are composed of subatomic particles, that are composed of consciousness, the consciousness that is you. So there is a body consciousness that you have. You have your dimension 1, physical subatomic. That's where the tiniest little parts are. That's where particuli move into chelons, move into the structures that are before, which we'll get into later. They're called myons and dions and trions and things. They're stages of matter. Okay? You have in dimension 1, the things that become the physical body structure. In dimension 2, the complex elemental compositions in the body, which hold the part of your awareness that you experience as emotion. They are your elemental or telluric parts of consciousness. And then you have your D3 mental body that's focused in the 3-dimensional flashline sequence. See, these are parts of your consciousness that are focused within 3 different flashline sequences that are intimately intertwined within a 3-dimensional. Remember, they all intersect at each other at 90-degree angles, 90-degree shift in angular rotation and particle spin. That means part of your consciousness has particles in D1 at that flashline sequence, at that particular particle spin. Then you have another part of your consciousness manifesting as your emotional elemental body that has a different particle spin in both of those, and it's a little bit faster than this and a little bit slower than this. And here's where the self that says, I look in the mirror and I see I. That's the part of you, your rational mind, your rational ego mind, that's stationed in these flashline sequences. All these other flashline sequences that are part of universal structure are also part of your body template structure, your 15-dimensional anatomy. So you have a piece of yourself, literally, in each of the dimensional fields. Once you start to realize this, you can know you can never be alone again. You know, there's no such thing as God abandoning you. It can't. You know, sometimes it might want to. You know, the part of yourself that's up here may get pretty sick of watching the part of yourself that's down here that you can't get through to, or, you know, running around in circles doing wacky stuff, because it gets very frustrating for the part that's stationed down here when its memory banks are wiped out where it doesn't remember. The rest of it's up here. It feels like somebody's always manipulating it. Either the outside hologram is running it, running you over, or some big something or other from the sky is pulling strings, because you're obviously not getting the life you're trying to make happen. Somebody's making it happen. And the parts of your consciousness up here, you can have distortions and twists in your consciousness, literally from D11 on down. Not everybody will, but you can. There are races of beings that literally have DNA template, what are called reversals, which are taking the divine blueprint and literally running it mathematically in reverse, which creates total distortion. It creates the opposite of Christos consciousness, which would be anti-Christos consciousness. Where there would be love, it creates evil and hate, that kind of thing. That's where you get your opposite as far as Christos versus anti-Christos. But each one of these dimensions corresponds to part of your DNA strand template, which means these higher parts of you that are up there, out there, through there somewhere, are intimately connected literally to your body right here with you. They're just dormant to you right here, right now, but they're not dormant to themselves. When we begin to get into this a little, we find out we have lots of selves. We find out, forget the concept of just reincarnation like it's taught in Hinduism and things. Oh, well, I was one person, then I died, and then I moved in and became this other person. Doesn't work like that. Time, space is a scalar field. It all happens at once. Think about that for a minute in relation to the concept of reincarnation. Wait a minute. If it all happens at once, how could I have been before, died there, and then came back here now? It doesn't work that way. It means that you are simultaneously, you have a part of yourself that's manifesting itself, a 3-dimensional body, in each of the density levels, but it also works horizontally. In the universal structure, one harmonic universe has numerous time cycles and time continua within it. And we put pieces of ourself as an avatar. We put pieces of ourselves in various different parts of the planetary, galactic, and universal time cycles for each of the universes. As we get into, we don't cover it too much in this book, but as we got into the Templar teachings, we got into the fact that each of us have 212 cycles of incarnation operating at all times, and we have a minimum of 1,728 selves running around in 12 dimensions, all at the same time. And they are all connected through the DNA template of every one of them. So the memories that you will get from other lifetimes are lifetimes that are happening right now in their space-time location. It also means that you're more you than you think than reincarnation gives you. You know, okay, I was somebody, I used to be important, but I'm this person now and I'm nobody. You know, it isn't like that. You're all important. You might have been King Tut in one of your other time vectors. You still are King Tut in that time vector, but you're also you in this one. And that's just as important. So when we begin to realize we have all these aspects of self, the concept of ever being alone, you throw it right out the window. Ever being bored, just go talk to one of yourselves. You know, you don't need to talk to angels, for goodness sake. You have enough of you running around in the time matrix to keep yourself company for eons. What's fascinating is in activating DNA, you begin to get the memory back of the parts of yourself that are stationed in the other time vectors. You begin to get the memory and the knowledge, the awareness. You begin to remember places and times where humans didn't have the mutation, where they knew what it meant to be a walking, living, breathing avatar and ascended master. You also will begin to remember the things that happened on this planet, that though in those other time vectors that are happening now in those other time vectors, where great sorrows were there. So the emotional body and the D2 part of yourself may find the memories first. When you start to activate DNA, you may have cycles of great joy, where just, wow, comes and you feel the energy, you just feel expanded. And then the next week, you just may be so depressed you don't know what hit you. If you look at yourself over a 6-month period, you might swear you're manic depressive, because first you're up when you're processing higher frequency, and then you're down when you're processing twisted stuff that's coming through the template from the other time vectors. You learn to be loving towards yourself with this, and realize that when the yucky stuff is coming through, it's making way for more of the higher stuff. But it's got to get out. It's got to get cleared. Part of what we'll talk about as we move through the Kathara program is learning about something called miasms. Miasms are basically anti-particle buildup in the particle field that hold what's called your karmic imprint into your DNA. This is the stuff that needs to be cleared. It comes through from the planetary grids, not just from your own personal DNA. So we're going to be investigating the process, whole bunches of processes that have to do with this. Oh, it's 10 o'clock? Okay. Yeah. See, I could keep you here till 2, which I won't do that. Okay. Well, actually, we're not doing too bad. We got this far anyway.
Go on for a bit. You want to
Okay. Yeah, we're supposed to end at 10. All right. Is anybody who has to go, like right now, are you tired? Do you want me to end for 10 o'clock, or do you want 15 minutes more?
As long as you're able.
Okay. I don't want to exhaust you, because it's supposed to be from 6 till 10. Is what? Is the limit? Okay. Okay. You want to go for 15 minutes more? Yeah. Okay. Good.
Good. Just finishing the vibrating oscillator. There's time for the planetary.
This is the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. I won't even start that now. That's another hour and 45 minutes. Yeah. Actually, it's pretty close. When I'm looking at it, the next thing, I knew there was going to be a break point either around page 25 or page 47, depending on how fast we moved. And I think it's good that we didn't go through to page 47. That's starting the Kathara grids. And this is where we get into more structure. Right now, you've got the diagram that's showing you, and all of these diagrams are in your books. Whatever you see go up here, you have a copy of in the manuals that you're getting. All right. Now, this structure is a core structure that will be used to show all sorts of things. As we move through the Kathara course, you'll find we'll discuss the currents of consciousness and energy that come down through this, that come into the time matrix from source through the structure. This is how we begin to learn what, if we're going to be a healing facilitator, how you know what frequency you're transmitting and when. how you get that particular frequency opened in your body. All of the healing systems on this planet for the last 200,000 years have only been able to run what's called one harmonic of energy, the density 1 harmonic, D1, 2, 3 frequency, and the subharmonics. Now when I talk about subharmonics, each dimension, each flash line, it's as if each light bulb is made of 12 little light bulbs. There are 12 subharmonics in each dimensional field. The 12 subharmonics correspond to the same flash lines of the 12 dimensions going up, but they're little versions of them. So you have subharmonics and harmonics. Now, in the last 200,000 years, because D12 current was not available on this planet, only these frequencies were able to be used in healing. Only these frequencies of consciousness were able to fully embody in the body without having major template restoration, which required help and contact with species that were off this planet that would help certain groups of humans to get their DNA back together. Now, what we are gifted with since January of 2000 is the return of the Maharata ray, the D12 current. From here, it's always there, but before, the planetary grids were blocked at this level. You could not pull this frequency through that barrier. What we have now is the ability to pull this and all those two down through. The reason it's so important to be able to pull D12 frequency is there's something in between each set of 3 dimensions that's called a magnetic repulsion zone, where actually the 3-dimensional fields create spheres of energy that push away from each other because of the relationship between electrical and magnetic charge, just like ends of a magnet. If you put the 2 same charged, electrically charged ends together, they push away from each other. To get through this barrier, there are things called seals and crystal seals that need to be released. And D12 current is needed for them to be able to open and close naturally. So we've literally been sealed into, in quarantine, on this planet for 200,000 years. It wasn't too bad until 25,500 BC. There was enough problems, some DNA distortion, but we at least could live up to about 800 to 1,000 years old then. In between 25,500 BC and 3,470 BC, there were major grid distortions added to the ones that were already there, not only blocking the D12 frequency, but chopping all these up where we couldn't even run the subharmonics. We could only run part of the subharmonic of 4, which means strand 1 could run up to the 4th subharmonic, but 5 through 12 were turned off. What this has done has chopped our chromosomes up in many little pieces. And what we're doing with the process of Kathara healing and Merkaba healing, and the healing, there will be more. This is a technology that's evolving. We're getting more. This is the beginning. We have to start with Kathara, because Kathara allows us to run this frequency. This frequency is the carrier wave for all of the others. So any level here, any strand level that corresponds to these that you want to heal, you need to run the D12 current to get it down here into density 1, into this reality field. So we're beginning the process of running the Maharata frequency. We will get into something called triadic phase currents, which are the currents that correspond to the interdimensional field. There are names of them. The one we're going to learn to run in Kathara level 1 is the Duratic current, which corresponds to these. We're going to run Duratic phase 1, which is beginning the process by opening the D4 current on a D12 carrier wave. So we're going to learn the currents we're running, and by the end of this, and I was really excited that they're giving it to me, that's why I'm probably going to be up several nights in a row trying to get this ready, like from now until Sunday night. The Vecca codes that I mentioned earlier are the mathematical programs that correspond to very specific areas of your subtle body anatomy that you'll learn about, that correspond to not only these areas, but also these areas, which is literally being able to bring in the light and primal sound imprint into the DNA template, which amplifies the heck out of any healing work you're going to do here. We're on a wonderful journey with the information that's being brought back here, and I'm very excited to bring it to you. I look at this as, I've worked really hard to translate a lot of this material. There were times when I worked 17-hour days, I'd sleep for 2 hours and get back up and do it again for week upon week upon week. The reason I did it was because of gratitude. I was so grateful to have access personally to this information, that to get it down on paper where other people could find that freedom just meant the world to me. And the beings, let's say, that have helped me to have access to the records, that this could be translated back here, they've worked hard too. So the reason I work so hard, and now the reason that Az is working so hard with me, is because we know what this can do for you, and we are so grateful ourselves to the founders races for originally giving us this information. And I don't know, I get choked up with that one. I don't even know what to say. I hope that you can feel the frequency, the energy. Let your emotional bodies feel it a little. There's a freedom being brought back to our planet. Az and I are speakers of that freedom. We are witnesses to that freedom. But so can each of you be. We don't have anything more than what you have. We just got our wake-up call a little earlier, that's all. It was more like somebody turned the bed upside down and just dumped us on the floor. Wake up! It's kind of where we are right now. But when we get into, the reason I didn't go into more tomorrow is because we're going to start with the Kathara grids, and there's several levels of that, several diagrams to go through and to explain parts of, and we'd be here probably till midnight if I started to introduce that now. So I won't, because somebody said 15 minutes is it. But we will get into all sorts of interesting things tomorrow. Let me see, do we have the thing there that lists the, no, we don't have that on there, do we? I don't think it's on the Mylar. Just want to give you a little what is that? Oh, no, that's not what I just want what I'm needing, but I can't read it because I'm looking for a format visually that my brain can read. Crystal seals grid, what's that? The diotic grid, what's that? Where do chakras and meridian lines and all those other miscellaneous pieces of things fit? We're going to find all this out tomorrow. When we get out of the context of healing, we'll go into the elements of healing. This is where we get into the human body translation, the microcosmic reflection of that macrocosmic structure within the human body form. And we'll talk about the human body Kathara grid and literally all of those parts that I've mentioned. We'll go from axiotonal lines into DNA templates, into chakras, meridian lines, which are different than axiotonal lines. We'll find out where these parts are. And that's the beginning of knowing how to run technology. Because if you don't know where your chakras are, you're not going to be able to pull up a certain current and run it someplace. You need to know where your chakras are. You need to know what seals need to be opened and what colors to use to open what seals. Okay, we'll get into this too, where you'll learn that each one of those flash line sequences creates a wavelength. And wavelength, as our scientists here will tell us, create color in terms of light. So we can direct wavelength by using chosen color, and we can direct frequency and wavelength simply by what colors we choose. But if we don't know what colors to choose that go with what flash line sequences that go with what dimensions, we're not going to know what we're doing. So we're going to learn all of those pieces and how they fit together. And that's the beginning of becoming a real Kathara healing facilitator. And I think I'll probably let you go on that note. And thank you very much. I'm just going to recap really fast what we talked about last night so we can move through into the structures that go along with the core structure. We talked about the context of healing last night, the context being the framework of the universe. We exist as a body within the universe. And if we're going to understand what it really means to do core template healing on ourselves, we need to understand our context, what we exist within. If we're running energy currents, what are they? Where are they coming from? So this is why in Kathara the beginning thing we do is we learn about universal order. We learn about primal order, the 15-dimensional system. We learn about basic things like scalar waves. Remember the little light bulbs we talked about that turn off and on. We learn about Partakai phasing. Now this I didn't read to you yesterday, but we talked about Partakai phasing. We talked about the standing scalar waves of Partakai, Partakai, and Partakam that literally form the scalar grid of which the particles that become matter are composed. These are the form that our consciousness takes on in order to enter the manifestation grid where an experience of 3D reality can happen. When we talked about Partakai phasing, we talked about the Partakai unit that breaks itself down into a Partakam and a Partakai, where it flashes on into manifestation, and then it reassembles itself back into the Partakai. So on and off is the flash line, or the phasing rhythm of Partakai units. It's the phasing rhythm of the individual Partakai units that creates the flashing on and off rhythms of the different lines of light bulbs, of scalar standing waves that the dimensional structure itself is built upon. Just because I wanted to add these words so you associate Partakai phasing and flashing on and off with two words, fission and fusion, because this is what it is about. It's very scientific stuff. When a Partakai breaks apart into a Partakay and a Partakam, it is polarizing. It is a process of polarization, taking one thing and breaking the electrical charge into two, where they oppose each other, and then bringing them back together, which is depolarizing. Now, Partakai phasing, it's a process of internal fission. That would be the turning off phase of the light bulb, where the two elements come back into the one, where your Partakay and your Partakam reassemble back into a Partakai. That is the process of fission, fusion. The things coming together. I got that backward. I'm sorry. Fusion. This is the contraction. This is where it turns off. Fusion is the contraction of the energy back into a vibration, as opposed to fission, which would cause it to expand and come back into manifestation as Partakay and Partakam. So if we can just understand that the flashing on and off process of Partakai units is done through a process, through a continuing process of internal, meaning it's taking place within the particles of consciousness themselves, internal fission and fusion. When a thing goes into fusion, it is depolarizing and going back into its wholeness. And when it goes into fission, it is expanding out and going into manifestation, flashing on. So the processes of fission and fusion are an intrinsic part of manifestation, which means they're an intrinsic part of healing. Later, when we'll touch on some of these teachings a little bit, but they're not really part of Kathara. When we get into the science of ascension, there are some of the teachings coming out now that we'll be teaching this year in a program called the Dance of Life program that's just coming out, and it'll be ready probably March as our first workshop. We're going to get into these processes that we're learning here and how they apply to the concept of what's called ascension, or transdimensional ascension, being able to take your physical body elsewhere and out of here, including back into full at one with Source. Ascension is the process that we've been promised in all the holy books for so long, but they took out the how-to. So the processes of fission and fusion, internal fission and fusion, are a part of the core structure of reality and how it's built. It has to do with the Partakai phasing, the turning on and off of scalar wave patterns that literally flash matter on and off, flash you in and out of the hologram. These are intrinsic parts of the science of ascension as well. Because in the science of ascension, you learn the mechanics of what it takes to create particle fission and fusion internally inside of your body that allows your molecules to literally demanifest and then relocate to another space-time rhythm or another flash line rhythm where you can remanifest there. It's also the science of Stargate passage. Ascension is Stargate passage. So there's a lot more to the teachings than are just in Kathara. Kathara is the beginning, because if you don't understand Kathara, you're not going to know how to run energy. Kathara teaches you how to run energy, and it teaches you the anatomy you need to run it through. If you don't know where chakras are, and you don't know what they are, you're not going to be able to direct frequency into them to make them do things you want them to do. So I just wanted you to understand just a little bit more in this recap of what we talked about. The Partakai phasing, or the flashing on and off of the standing scalar waves of the little light bulbs, has to do with internal fission, which is the expansion turn-on phase, and internal fusion, which is the contraction and pulling back together phase. Now, when you hear those words, usually they're in relation to science. Science is trying to figure out processes of cold fusion and all sorts of wild stuff. They're beginning the process of understanding what the atoms and molecules and nucleus of cells can do when you combine them in certain ways, but they don't understand the interdimensional template. Right now, quantum theory, and they use it as theory, a lot of scientists don't even believe that that's real yet. They have no concept that there are really multidimensional reality structures, and that there's a very specific mathematical order to them. So right now, the way fission and fusion are being used in the scientific world is like a child playing with an atomic bomb. Right? They're going to create things that they don't even know they're creating, and they're going to be creating things not only here, but in other reality systems that they don't believe exist. They're going to be blowing things up in other places while they're trying to make energy here. So when we learn the processes of dimensional structure, we are actually getting an education that is far advanced compared to what you can pay $200,000 to go and get a degree in when you go into science here. You can do that, and what I'd love to see is people who've already done that get into this and start making the bridge between them, where they start to be able to see, oh, this is what that means. When we see this effect, this is where that's coming from. Instead of saying, they didn't teach me that in school, so it's wrong. Because that's where a lot of scientists will come from when they hear this material. Except we're getting to the point now where we're translating it into their language. At the end of this, we'll get into the two particle units or subparticle units called myons and dions, which are the first stage between going from the things we're talking about now, which are template. All right, these are waveforms that we're talking about, where waveforms of consciousness make the transition into matter density. The first thing they come out as are particles called myons and dions. And from there, they go into things like quarks and negative and positive charge subatomic particles that build up to be molecules, that build up to be atoms excuse me, atoms and elements and all of those things that matter is built on. So what we're talking about here directly applies to what science thinks it knows. And it's interesting because we're going into those bridges now. When we first started teaching this, it was like here was this science and there was that science, and they didn't speak the same language. But now we're making the bridge between them. So it won't be too long now before some of the more radical scientists in the world decide, this is worth paying attention to. And it's kind of interesting because you guys will be able to talk with them. And there's the scientific community can so often be like this elite club where because they know about this stuff and you don't, there's this intellectual ego attachment that happens where they think they know everything, and if they don't, they have to fill in the blanks and make it look like they do. And they don't like to hear about people who are presenting ideas that differ from what they know to be true, because what they know to be true in their own mind is the only thing that possibly can be. So there's going to be some interesting changes. You'll probably end up, because you're getting a body of data that has a science base as well as a spiritual base, you may find in your hologram, because you carry an energy signature now, you may find people of that association being drawn into your life in strange contexts. You run into them at work. You may find strange conversations coming up where you get to project out into the hologram the information you picked up here. So anyway, we'll get back on to, we got Partakai phasing. We got dimensions. It's important to understand that dimensions are scalar grids. They're those rows of those light bulbs. They have a specific structure. They are, what a dimension is a very specific flash line sequence, which is a sequence of those light bulbs or scalar waves turning on and off at very specific rhythms. What differs one dimension from the next is the flash line rhythm is different between each of them. The lower dimensions have slower on and off flash rhythms, and the higher ones have fastest. And there is a different angular rotation of particle spin, which means the spin axis that matter particles rotate on, has a 90-degree shift between each dimensional level. So these are very specific structures. This is the architecture of the universe, the primal order that dimensions are created on. There are infinite numbers of dimensions in the cosmic matrix, but they all follow one set pattern, and that's the 15-dimensional matrix system. That's the system of mathematical calculation that forms geometrical forms that allow the hologram of matter, the three-dimensional world, to be projected out. There are other types of things in creation that are not in manifest worlds, that are built on other things where you don't get three-dimensional perception. They're levels that a part of you already knows about, that's in those type of reality fields. And once you get out of the manifest hologram completely, the universe, in terms of consciousness, is limitless. So these aren't the only types of worlds there are, but as far as three-dimensional worlds, they all follow this structure. I have seen different programs of people teaching using dimensional octaves and healing and this kind of stuff, and they'll say, oh, we'll go up to dimension 5,940. And it's like, okay, where might that be located? What they tend to do is they will count the subharmonics, or pieces of subharmonics of one dimension, as a whole dimension, as if it was a whole dimension unto itself, where they'll say, oh, I'm on D12, when they're actually using the frequency that goes with D1, the 12th subharmonic. There's a big difference. When we're working with the currents that we're going to learn to work with today, they're called triadic phase currents. We are working with the currents of energy that are from the higher dimensional spectra. That means they have a faster flash line sequence than the frequencies that are available in dimensions 1, 2, and 3. Right now, we exist in dimensions 1, 2, and 3, the we that we know ourselves as. we also have parts of ourselves simultaneously in the other reality fields. And if you met one of yourselves from the other places, you'd think you'd met an alien, because they look different. Our bodies in the higher dimensional fields don't look just like us. They're made of a different kind of matter, and the features are different. They're taller, for example. When we get our 12-strand pattern back, when we get our 12 strands cleared eventually this race, we'll be anywhere from 7 to 12 feet tall. We'll have 144 chromosomes. We will be very different. If one of us came from the future after we had healed what's wrong with our race now and came to visit here in this present, they would be locked up by world military and studied from now until eternity, because they would be considered a deviation or a mutation that has something to do with humans. But my goodness, what are they? And they'd be terrified of them, because beings with 12-strand activation can do things like levitate, appear and disappear at will, project energy balls across the room. You know, so it'd be a real threat to national security if we all became 12-strand activated all of a sudden. You know. Anyway, this is the beginning of evolving into what our full pattern of being a species is. There are reality fields that exist right now that have not had the problems of evolution that we have. We have been in quarantine on this planet for 25,500 years. We had problems before that, but they got really bad at that point. This is why we have no history records left. They've been purposely removed and hidden, and that wasn't a fair thing, and that's not something God wanted to do. All right, there's a lot of history that goes with what we teach. Most of that is released in the Templar course next weekend, where we get heavily into exploring the forbidden and the lost history, so we can understand how things could possibly have gotten as bad as they are right now. Because they're not good, but they're not hopeless by any means. The beginning of our getting control of our reality back, of our reality field, so we can begin to reinstate the Christos ideal, which is the heaven ideal, where people are living in harmony and they love each other and they're working cooperatively instead of competing with each other, and where there is no lack, because you can manifest whatever it is you need. These are ideals that as a culture we can grow into. Our beginnings are learning to work with this. One of the things I try to avoid with a new audience dealing with at first, until they start to understand some of the other things that go with the Kathara healing, is, where did this information come from? Outer space? Not exactly. Inner space? Closer. Now, we talked about the scalar grid of the universe, the universal matrix, and the fact that there's all these different dimensional fields. Dimensions go in sets of 3. And 3 dimensions create a 3-dimensional holographic electromagnetic domain, and in that domain there are universes, and those universes are populated. We talked about the fact that we have other simultaneous incarnations, because time is really a set of repeating flashline sequences, and they're all taking place at once. And you will see the linear progression of time that your body and your consciousness is coded to. The molecules in your body actually flash off and on. They flash off and on, and so does your consciousness, within the rhythms of the specific 3-dimensional system that you were born into. Now, our science tells us that, well, now they're telling us that, gee, we found some planets that have the elements for life on them. Maybe we're not alone. But for years, we were just alone. We were the only species in the universe that had any intelligence. God created us to be the bosses, la-di-da, all that stuff. That's not true. There are people, huge civilizations in the 15-dimensional matrix, just our 15-dimensional time matrix, that have for eons, millions and millions and millions and billions, some of them years, evolved along the Christos principles. They are fluent time travelers. Time travel to them is nothing. Once you know how to regulate your DNA, you simply change your flashline sequence and you can pop up anywhere you want to project your thoughts to. You can take your body with you. They know how to do this. They've been watching and monitoring this place for a very long time. The group of beings we work with are called the Iani. The word Iani means of the Yanis, and Yanis is a word in the language called Anahazi that means ascended masters. So the beings that are called the Iani, that are part of the Guardian Alliance, for anybody who's read the Voyagers books, they are incarnate civilizations of ascended master consciousness from the primal sound fields. They have a direct open link to their consciousness in those levels. And they're in this time matrix as a guardian race to make sure that evolving civilizations don't compromise themselves with their free will so badly that they destroy the creation framework itself. because there are certain laws of energy that God set down when God created this framework that the hologram could take place within. If those laws of energy are bent and broken and abused to a certain degree, you can literally collapse a time matrix, which means you're still within God, but you're trapped within like a little energy bubble, and you have no memory. You have no memory of your relationship with self or God. The concepts of heaven and hell were simplified concepts to help us to understand that when we evolved along a certain set of principles, the Christos principles, that go with the universal structure. If we're working with universal structure, as God said it, we will progressively grow into a heavenly type of civilization. If we work in ways that we're using energy against the natural laws of creation, we will damage ourselves, and we will also cause damage to the creation framework. There is a lot of allowance in the will of God. There's a lot of horrible things allowed to take place. God didn't make them happen, but they're allowed to take place in order for consciousness to learn to not do it that way. But there's a limit of how far that can be allowed to go in a time matrix before it collapses the whole system. We're at a point in our civilization right now where if changes aren't made now during this Stargate opening cycle that we're moving into, we will not be able to bring it back around to the divine blueprint. So there's a lot of attention being paid to Earth right now by civilizations who have served as guardian races. There are civilizations of beings in three-dimensional hologram like we are, physically solid like we are. There are beings all the way up the matter density scale in their own type of civilizations that are working here. So this information is the original Christos Founders Race information, which means the first time this data on how creation works was translated and given to us by the primary races that seeded this time matrix. They exist in density 4, which means they're in pre-matter density, the liquid light beings. What's interesting is everybody that's in the lower densities has a self in one of those civilizations, their own Christos self. What's interesting to know is when we're being ourselves here and becoming aware that, wow, I have a Christos avatar level of self, that's me there. I have that consciousness so I can learn to access it. It's not just a matter of bringing that consciousness into your body. One of the amazing things is realizing that part of you also has its own body and its own density level. And it knows a whole bunch of people up there, and it's doing its own thing, as well as communicating with you. When you become an avatar, which means remember that you are one, and open the conduits, you start to realize that you are simultaneously expressing in 1,728 different forms all at the same time. Each form is a time vector. Each form is a life from birth to death or ascension. Some of them are immortal, where death isn't even a reality anymore because you know how to take your particles with you when you want to move from one dimensional space to another. There's a really interesting transition that happens when you begin to realize and begin to go into what's called even soul integration, where you start to become aware of yourself in dimension 4, 5, and 6, where you start to integrate the soul frequencies. You start to look at yourself as a collective. For a while, it took, when I was speaking, I had to be very careful because they kept referring to me as we. And then it was like, oh, I got to realize you don't talk that way in this time frame, because people still say I, as in, when you say we, they think you're a split personality. It's like, and it's not about split personality, which is a fragmentation of the personality you have. Split personality is a thing that happens to some people when their DNA is really messed up, and they actually fragment into multiple personality fragments that fight for the body. This is the opposite of that. Split personality is a fragmentation process where the identity is falling apart rather than coming together. Multiple identity focus is what an avatar is, where you simultaneously get to the point where you can actually track all of your cells, or at least the ones that are most pertinent to the focus that you're looking at. You'll find that you'll have memory. You have it right in your body right now of your fetal integration process, where your consciousness intersected with that baby body pattern in your mommy's womb. We all have that information stored in us. That means you also have what you were just before you made that decision. It also means you have the ability to go fast forward in time and find out what point you're leaving here. And you can have a direct influence on choosing how you want to leave. Do you want to die a body like most people do in this time frame? Sometimes it's worth doing that, even if you learn how to ascend. Sometimes there's so much in the body that your body's gone through that it would take too long and too much work to actually ascend that particular body, so you make a choice to die well instead. Once you become aware of the multidimensional consciousness that goes with integrating who you are, other people that haven't done that think you're absolutely out there. Because things that terrify them, things that they pray to some God they hope is there for, are just common knowledge to you. Like when you decide you're going to have children, or your children are having children, bringing grandchildren in the world, you can be fully aware of who they are and what they are before they're even conceived, and when they're planning to come, and where they'd like to be conceived, and all sorts of things. You can find out who they were. You look at your children differently. Just because they came through your body doesn't mean they're yours. Who is this soul? You know, hopefully it was a peaceful time we knew each other last time. If not, we'll act it out this time, I'm sure. It changes the whole way we perceive and interact with reality, progressively giving us more freedom, where we begin to realize there is huge freedom for free will choice and personal desire fulfillment in this reality. And we do not have to cause harm to others in order to fulfill ourselves. This system we're living in this world right now, is built upon the ideas of lack, of finite existence, of not enoughness of anything, and of a group of people that have to compete with each other in order to have the right and the energy to be on a planet. That is an anti-Christos model. For the last 25,000 years, and for a bit of time before that, this planet has been fulfilling an anti-Christos vision that was not the vision of humankind, and it was not the vision of the founders' races. We're beginning to restore what the real vision was. The Christos realignment mission is about bringing that vision back, and it starts with our energy systems. It starts with each one of us recognizing that we are a blessed manifestation and face of God. You have every right to look in the mirror and say to yourself, I am God. That doesn't mean you're going to bully anybody else, because if you are, so are they. But next time you want to yell at somebody or whack them in the head, think about the fact that they may forgot too, but somebody's got to remember, we are God. If you smack somebody, you're smacking God. If they smack you, they're doing the same thing. After a while, when you start to play with your hologram and really dissect what you're doing in it, you start to ask yourself, why did I just come up and slap myself if somebody else came up and slapped you? Because you realize that's a face of you too. What am I trying to tell myself here? So you start to own your experience a little more, where the victim game doesn't entrap you so much. But that's later. The first part comes in learning the technologies that will allow you to begin to open in your body directly the consciousness that goes with the higher frequencies. It's kind of nice with Kathara healing, as you become a healing facilitator that's capable of assisting others in their healing process. Every time you assist someone else, you're opening those frequencies in yourself as well, which means you're helping to heal yourself. So every time you give, you're getting in return. So there's an orientation that comes with working with the Christos energies that has to do with whatever you desire most and feel you're most lacking, try to give it to someone. Because you're opening in a space in you for that energy to be refilled with the pattern. If you want to give it to yourself, give it to someone else first. And you will find that the universe responds in kind. That includes love. It includes money sometimes, because money can be a real bugger. The way it's done here in our civilization, we're like little monkeys on a string. Those little hidden forces that somehow control our world that we can never figure out who they are or how they're doing it, seem to have made it where money is what talks. Money has become the new god in this civilization. And money is an illusion. It's a symbol for the transferring of power. That's all it is. It's just paper or coin that means really nothing unless we assign a value to it. And you'll find, if you want to make energy come to you, in whatever form, you simply learn how to run energy in your body. If you want to help yourself and heal your bank account, you can do that in a reasonable way by learning to run energy. Simply run energy. Forget what it's called. Forget this money thing. I need money. What you're doing is manifesting a condition where you need money. We learn to talk to ourselves differently as we integrate the higher consciousness. We learn that we can say, I need money, or I'm aware that I created a situation where I don't have this right now. I think I'll change that. I have money now. Walk around for a week saying to yourself, I have money now. That feels good, doesn't it? No, you're manifesting a thought form. You have to put some energy into it, but the more you do, you're helping it into manifestation. You also learn to use your words very carefully. There's something very tricky about language. It's been used against us for 25,000 years. Language is sound. Yes, when it comes out of our mouths, it's sound. When we think, we talk to ourselves in our heads, we're still making sound, internal sound. Sound is vibration. Sound is a waveform. When we are using Kathara healing, we are using several things as the tools by which we will direct energy. One of them is color, because through directing color in the mind, you are directing very specific light, very specific wavelengths of light, which means if you know what colors go with what dimensions, you can, by choosing the right color, direct that frequency in your body. We are also using sound. Sound, every image in light has its equivalent translation in sound, which means every time we use words, there's a light pattern that goes with it. We repeatedly and continually program our hologram by the words we use to represent things to ourselves in the world. We can look at something and say, oh my God, isn't that awful? Oh, that's horrible. Oh, that's so terrible. It's devastating. If you want to create your emotional body going right down into the pits so you can explore what misery feels like, that's the way you want to speak to yourself. But if you want to get a handle on how you feel on a day-to-day basis, realize that there are technologies of light and sound, and words are part of those technologies. You will learn to say to yourself, wake up in the morning, realize I can have a good day, or I can have a day that really feels lousy. Who's going to make that happen? Me. Okay? I can choose to react to any situation, any way I desire. This is where your power comes in. You can have somebody drop a bomb in your front yard, and you can look at that and go into absolute terror. You can say, oh my God, we're hopeless, it's terrible, the world's falling apart. And you can go to try find somebody who's strong and is trying to calm people like that down. You can go into hysteria if you want to. You can go into the silent, God is punishing us. And if you tell yourself those things, you will live the reality as if that were so. That is what you will see evidence for in your hologram. We can lighten our load a lot if we make a promise to ourselves that I'm not going to be afraid to look at things that sound scary, but if somebody says, that's like something that really has a problem that has to be addressed, it's a bad thing, it's like really making a mess, you can say, yes, I acknowledge, I can see the mess that's making. So you face the things that are negative. You don't go off into la-la land like a lot of the people in the Light, Love, and Clueless movement do, where they say, oh, it's bad, I'm in Christ consciousness, I won't look at that. You know, great, stay in polarity then. You know, you're still polarized if you're in, I don't look at negative stuff. You can look at negative stuff neutrally. You can say, there's a much better way to express that. You can see somebody in horrible pain and have great empathy for them. You can look at that two ways too. Oh, it's so terrible that this poor person is having to suffer. And if somebody close to us, it's very, very easy to go there. This poor person is suffering for no reason. It's so unfair. Life is unfair. God is unfair. How could they do this? Or somebody that dies before their time. How do you know what before their time was? How do you know that they even wanted to stay as long as they did? See, we're taught to look at things in our lives in ways that creates us misery. It creates us emotional body drama, so we never have time to go find out the good stuff that's in there with our minds. So one of the things, as we work with Kathara healing, we're going to use color to direct frequency because we're directing wavelengths of light. We are going to use sound tones at different times, particularly as we move into the Kathara 2 level. There are some sacred sounds, and I'll tell you in a minute why they're sacred compared to other sounds. And we're going to use something called symbol codes. Now, symbol codes are interesting. They look like drawings when we see them from here, from the three-dimensional mind. They are forms of light that hold mathematical pattern. Every image, if you draw a triangle, you are actually making a mathematical pattern. You are telling flashlight sequences what to do. When we use symbols in Kathara healing, we are activating, we are using symbols that are drawn from a knowledge of the universal symbol banks that know what the programs are and what they direct and what they control. The symbols that we use in Kathara healing, and there's going to be tomes of them eventually. Right now we work with one called the Hierophant and a few that you're going to learn at the end, the new stuff, called the Vecca codes. But some of them look like pretty pictures. These are frequency templates. They speak directly the mathematical instructions. When you hold a symbol in your mind, what you are doing is holding a mathematical signature. When you energize that signature with a color of light or a sound tone, you are adding energy to it, and when you direct it into a certain part of your anatomy, you are sending that mathematical program into that part of the anatomy to affect change, which implies it helps to know what your symbols are for, what symbols to use, because you don't want to send something in there that's going to mess things up. If you think about symbols in terms of walking down the street in a day, how many signs are we bombarded with? When we watch TV, how many things are we bombarded with visually? Visually, all of this is a mathematical scalar template. Everything in this room has a mathematical translation, which means it has a symbol that holds the image, a symbol that we would see from here, that holds the image of what that mathematical scalar grid is. This thing has a different mathematical code than my body, obviously, or I'd look like that and it would look like me. So everything you are built on sets of mathematical codes that can be translated, so your mind here can see them, into symbol images. There are some universal ones that apply to everything in manifestation, and they're the ones we're beginning to work with, that every template in the three-dimensional hologram is built upon some core symbols, which means those symbols can be used to directly reset the organic mathematical patterns back into the body. So the flashline sequences that the body is composed of, the template of the body is composed of, can be more rapidly restored and more directly restored. So Kathara healing, we'll use that. We will use symbols. We will use color to direct frequency. And we will use sound. The sounds are interesting. Now sounds, we're surrounded by it all the time. We're surrounded by awful sounds out there. We're surrounded by language of all sorts. We're also surrounded by all sorts of sounds that you can't really quite hear. The sounds of electricity, the sounds of some of the wild technologies they don't tell you about that are being operated out there. Things like HARP and those kind of things. We're being bombarded with sound frequency, and it's directly affecting our bodies. When we use words from our particular language, the English language, or from any of the languages that are on the planet right now, we are using reversed fragments. There was an event that I talked about, I mentioned it briefly yesterday, the Tower of Babel incident that's recorded in the Bible. That's one of the few stories that were actually true that remained in the records because it became useful for those who wanted to use the misinterpretation to manipulate people. God didn't come down and blow up the Tower of Babel and scramble the languages. That was when the last grid distortions were put into the planetary grids. The ones that created the full checkerboard matrix mutation in the DNA, that literally chopped our DNA up in pieces and reversed part of it. The DNA and language are intimately connected. The DNA is made of light and sound templates. We are using a language now that carries partial reversals, which means the mathematical sequence, the way it was supposed to be in the body, where it was twisted from the grids, it actually run in reverse sequence, which blocks the energy flow, is now in our languages. The languages that have evolved since the time of 25,500 BC began to have those reversals. After 3,470 BC, they went severely into reversals. When we work with the advanced aspects of Kathara healing, we begin to use a language that sounds pretty foreign to hear. It was the original language, the first spoken auditory language in the time matrix. It's the founder's language. It's called Anahazi. It's a Lyran language. It's also called Mua. Mua are associated with the Lemurians because the Lemurians spoke that language. That's part of the history we get into in the Templar course. Now, when we see weird words, which we'll do in this Kilon, what's a Kilon? Right? Where did these words come from? Yeah, did I just like sit there one day and decide to invent a bunch of new words and give them meanings? No. You know, the words that are used in Kathara that are obviously not in the English dictionary or any other dictionary on the planet right now are drawn from the Mua language, from the Anahazi language, the Lyran Syrian founder's language. It is the first and the purest auditory sound translation of the energy and mathematical signature behind energy essence. It is a huge language. There are pieces of Mua are actually involved with a bunch of different languages on the planet. There's a little piece here, a little piece there. So it wasn't all lost. Only part of it was lost. Language is very important because language has the ability, sound has the ability to either activate DNA strands or shut them down, to either create blockages in your DNA template or to remove them. This is why there was great pains taken to manipulate languages on this planet, because if we had the sacred languages, we would be able to clear our bodies, and we would be able to get our consciousness and our avatar cells back in body. And once you're an avatar embodied, nobody's going to push you around. You know? There are certain forces that have been operating on this planet for 25,000 years that have a vested interest in keeping everybody controllable, because they don't have any power themselves, so they need to steal power from other people, collectives. That's what we're dealing with, and we're using languages right now that are actually helping to keep us trapped. We don't have much of a choice. I mean, if we can go learn Anahazi and start speaking Anahazi, everybody's just going to think, put you in a wacky ward because that's not a known language. This person's crazy. It would be hard to live in society if we were just going to go right back into the Anahazi language. But as we work with Kathara, we will learn certain key words, songs. There's something called the sacred songs, and it's P-S-O-N-N-S. It's not song, S-O-N-G, but it might as well be, because when you use them, they sound like them, and some of them are beautiful. There are ones that activate a part of your DNA template that's called the tribal shield, which is your connection to the species template, that activates more of your frequencies. So we're going to be using sound, and the more we work, the more we go into Kathara healing, the more we're going to touch on that. The Anahazi language is really beautiful. It has a... I'll do one thing for you. I'm just getting the urge to do this, and it's probably because they need to set the grid in the room, okay? Sound is also can set protection fields very easily. That's why, like, if you use certain sound tones, you could actually key a room where the astral plane can't interfere or mess with you if there's anything that would like to attach to people's fields and things. You can protect yourself from that. One of the songs that's used for that is the piece of a larger song, and I'll just do the little one, because this is a mathematical song. Again, these are all coded to the mathematics of scalar grids that create certain frequencies that come alive in the room. This one, you could probably sing it back to me, and I'm getting the urge that we should do this, okay? Now, I'll sing it once to you, and you've never heard, some of you might have heard it, but I think most of you haven't. It's a song that begins the process of activating the D12 frequency in and bringing it in quickly into the body. All right, you're not going to immediately be able to bring a lot of D12 frequency in. But when you use songs like this, it's a little short thing, it's enough to generate and to stimulate that frequency in the template and open it up. This one's called the Shaddai Ure song, and it's about anchoring the pillar of first cause light, as it's called, which is your connection to the primal light and sound fields through the divine blueprint. And it's very sweet and very short. It goes, Shaddai Ure Yakum Tan. You do it 3 times. Shaddai Ure Yakum Tan. Shaddai Ure Yakum Tan. Now, if you play with just a few little syllables there, that's in the Anahazi language, and it's part of a larger song that takes a while to learn. This song is going to be put in the new material, by the way. So the one I'm talking about that this is a part of, it's the Christos invocation song, where it blows open your connection to your Christos self to get a burst of D12 frequency to run through you. And it's very good if you need protection or if you need to solve a problem or anything like that, and a lot of other things. Just wanted to give you an example. Now, try to, just for a minute, go in your head and do the Shaddai Ure Yakum Tan with that tone. Shaddai Ure Yakum Tan. Just try to hear it in your head. Try to feel it. Try to feel where in your body you're feeling it. These are very specific areas of the body that these sounds go with. The first places you should feel it are almost completely across the front of your chest. Right here, across the heart chakra, and down through here, across the middle. That's your astral body connection with your 4th chakra, and your mental body connection with the 3rd chakra. When you build frequency by repeating, this is why a lot of the Eastern religions will have you go Om from now until eternity, right? You are building the frequency pattern with repetition of the sound. You are creating critical mass with the sound, critical mass of those frequencies. So just the simple process of singing the Shaddai Ure Yakum Tan to yourself, kind of like a little melody as you go about your days, you are helping your DNA to activate. You are helping your Christos consciousness to get back in your body faster. And eventually you will learn how to use songs like that to direct energy that could literally get you out of predicaments if you needed to. Let's say you were one of those people that were on the airplane that crashed into one of the trade towers. If anybody on that plane knew how to run sound frequency, they could have sang a song like a lullaby that would have neutralized the neurological structure of the guys with the guns. Wouldn't hurt them. It just made them go to sleep for a while. That is the power of sound. If you want examples of the power of sound, think about the pyramids in Egypt. You know the stuff we're taught about how they might have got those blocks up there? Yeah, right. They hoisted them up with thousands of men. Sure they did. You know, no, that was only in the reconstruction after they got knocked down several times and we didn't have the sound technologies anymore. When they were originally built, just like things in Machu Picchu, Peru, and just like there's temples all over the place, that how did they get those big things up there, those huge thousands of tons of rock up there when they hadn't even had some of them the wheel yet, right? Sound. You would literally have groups of people sit and sing certain songs together and build a waveform, a standing waveform, and then together project it with thought, project it toward the object with the same intention. And you could literally float things up large spaces. You could actually make them disappear here and appear where you wanted them. These are the powers that used to belong to humanity. These are the powers we're moving back toward.